I was actually at the filling station the day they changed that price.
Hi, welcome back to the 501 podcast. I know it's been a while and we're coming back bigger and better. So today we'll be having a very important conversation around these times and season. So for the record, this around June 2023, in case you're watching this subsequently. Now, there's breaking news. Breaking news before the breaking. Subsidy removal. Now, it's a recent action and super pack movie with several seasons unfolding every day and people coming to the dawn of the realities of the times and season. And to even make it much more interesting, some neighboring countries, according to some rumors, I saw some news, some people are even protesting in some countries that doesn't concern them. So how they will explain subsidy affecting them, I don't understand. But today we'll be discussing in our own context, okay? So we're sharing our experiences around the effects, survival after subsidy removal. Is your life already subsidized? And if you be the big boy, you'll be doing loud, you'll be driving V6 engine, firing to Lekki back and forth. Baby, can you show up? I just carry you. So we just want to know your new experiences and how we have all been adapting to the new realities. So I have some very interesting people here and maybe they will introduce themselves. So start from my far left. So young lady.
Hi, my name is Chiamaka Okoni and I'm married.
She's married now. Yeah,
Just in case.
No, my name is Banji and I'm actually also married. Without a ring, but I'm married.
Okay.
The only single person.
Wait now.
Oh, yeah.
All right, my name is Adekunle. Unfortunately, I'm the only guy that's not yet married.
He's the only single guy in the group. So I'm married now. Yes, I'm married. Maybe 5 years and counting. So my name is Revocube and I'm anchoring this show for today. All right, so today we'll be having some very important conversations around experiences. In my own case, for the past over a decade now, I've never been too far from my place of work. So it's never more than 15 minutes drive, or if you're there, 30 minutes walk from my office to my house. And so all these subsidy and all of those things, I've never really had a direct impact. So that's why I have different people coming from different perspectives here. So now we start from you, the married woman. How was subsidy changed the dynamics of your operations? So let me, as the operations manager, no, as the operations manager of the house, how has it affected the operations? Do you still blow gen 12 to 6?
Okay, truthfully, I'm not married actually, I'm engaged.
So still part of it.
It's part of it actually. So what subsidy did to me is a very funny story. Okay. I don't drive, but so when the subsidy was removed, I did something. Panic buying.
Hey!
In one day.
You bought for under your bed?
In one day, I bought... No, because I knew that prices of things would go up.
Mm-hmm.
In one day, I bought what I would have bought in 3 months.
Wow.
Do I have food right now? I do.
Of those. Okay,
but
not petrol really.
Not petrol.
You bought every other thing.
Yes, because removal of fuel subsidy would affect
every other thing. Yeah.
So because I bought all of those things, I have food, yes. But I didn't do budgeting. I didn't plan for other things.
Why?
And now transportation has skyrocketed. So because of that, I have to wake up early just to use my legs to cover some distance.
More.
I don't know how long I'm going to keep doing that.
How sustainable that is.
I don't know. So it's a very
can imagine.
It's a very crazy situation for me.
So your story.
My own story. I'm not sure we'll finish. But let me start. Okay, so because I drive to work every day. In fact, I was actually at the filling station the day they changed that price from 186 or something to 490. We were on the queue like this. So the impact was very shocking. So at that point, I was like, do I want to buy this way? After staying on the queue from, I think I got to the fuel station around to 6 in the morning. and they changed the price around 9.
Wow.
And I was
so
like,
3 hours you've been on the queue.
Yes, and it was almost my turn. So in fact, some people had bought with the old price, and then they locked the gates.
But that's still better than locking the gate in front of
they had to lock the gates. So at that point, everybody was wondering what was going on. Only for us to hear that NNPC has changed price, and then it was changed. But I think that I eventually bought because I needed it.
The higher price.
Yes, I bought. I think my tank would normally take about 6,000, 7,000, but then I ended up buying. When I bought 10,000 and it was like just a bit over half, I had to buy like 15K. So now I'm from 6,000 to 15K.
Wow.
That is a lot.
Wow.
That's 9,000.
And I have to use that twice in a month. So it's really huge.
So my own story now, I don't know how much to fill my tank now. I think when I bought that particular car those years back, about maybe 8K will fill it. At some point, it was becoming like 16K. Later, it was becoming like 20K.
Wow.
So now, give or take now, about 140 liters and fuel tank size. So
wow.
I don't want to know how much yet. So I try to maintain my sanity. And funny enough, before the subsidy removal, he has said it in his campaign. He has said multiple times.
Yeah.
So the Friday before the swearing in, I was going to the island. And I was from the university I went to, we read the environment. When you see movement, you know when to take flights and when to. So I already noticed that the movement around the PlayStations, there's no queue. Yeah. But the dynamics are changing.
They are selling or not.
So the vehicle I was with, I first entered not police station.
First station.
Drove into the police station, fill that tank up. Then I called everybody at home, please. All the cars. Full tank. No. And I think that's what I'm still burning now.
Wow.
And hopefully I'll see the new price list after. So, Mr. Singleman.
All right. The new regime ushered in eat ground and running. Well, I ran on Tuesday.
You don't eat the ground running.
As in, it was
Continue running.
On the Tuesday that we resumed. I think I boarded like 4 buses. Then from Yaba to Pangrove, 4 buses because most of them were not going to. I was just in Ojota bus.
How many?
No Ikeja. Well, just one from Yaba Ikeja. Then from Pangrove to Maryland alone is 500. I said, okay, but no bus. So I had to trek from Pangrove to walk. And it was funny. At first,
to walk.
Yes, no.
Pangrove to GRE.
To GRE, yes. So yes.
You didn't tell us this.
The funny thing is, just like you said, the panic buying and all. So I had this issue when the money scarcity and all. I withdraw a whole lot. So when I withdrew this time around, I withdrew like someone was chasing me. So I just had the moment like, okay, if I'm spending
the cash, that would be a sad story.
I spent twice of how much I spent for just going alone. Wow. Now, in fact, sometimes in the morning I had to beg for 700 naira. What I take 200 naira, 300 naira.
Wow.
So, in fact, sometimes they're like 700 naira, too bad, get out.
Hey, and these are the new realities.
It was before that you sit with people, normal people inside the bus. But now I sit with all these fish sellers with 700 naira. You have to squeeze yourself. And they're like, if you are not going, please leave. Another person wants to enter.
Sit on the engine or sit on the chair?
On the chair. And sometimes I will have to do some trekking down to some certain area. Because sometimes when you drop me, I will have to still trek a bit. So is either to get a bus or probably to just subsidize the amount I'm spending. Yeah. And also to buying of food. God.
Hey. So I think this kind of realities, that's where people have to start knowing how to share rights with people.
How to adjust.
So that you for those who are driving, you share the costs. Definitely you are nice. I take somebody after work and say, bros, Alpha, I go drive for that junction.
In fact, I think I actually saw somebody that was asking me on this our road, asking me, are you going towards I think Yaba or something? And I was like, no, I'm not going to Yaba, but I'm still going towards Maryland. You can drop at Maryland. And the person wanted to join me. So,
and this subsidy thing, we used to think like, okay, subsidy is only about transportation. There's also the part with the power generating drama. Okay. So I heard a rumor, I've not confirmed the story, but it was stated that before subsidy removal, it was estimated that we're consuming about 60 million liters a day. After removal, it dropped to 13 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, who are the ghosts? Where has the petrol been going to? But that's the conversation for another day. So now, the part of the conversation, I don't think people will be blowing gen anyhow anymore.
Yes.
How do you still power the in between?
In my area, okay.
You still use gen for season film.
Yeah, okay. My aunt, for instance, my aunt uses gen to pump water to sell to all these smaller. I just noticed, but after the first subsidy or the hike in price, so my aunt will always wait till NEPA brings light. So I was like, I know the year gen. Also, because most times she owns the gen between 11 and 4 a.m. In fact, the building next to my building, almost like 4 gens, they were always blowing. Now, everything is just quiet. I was like, this is nice. Oh. And like before, it was always from one noise to the other, So like, if I had to ask,
so there's the
like,
good side
what's
of
going on? They're like, they are rationing the fuel. I said, oh, you people can ration fuel now.
Imagine if this had happened between February and March, when the weather is really hot.
Actually, the weather is super okay. It's raining now, it's
subsiding.
Cool.
I don't know how people would have.
So I think the good thing about it is that, well, for me, it has taught me to now pay more attention on my spending. So before, yes, I kind of have this spending. But now I know. In fact, I remember I went to meet my colleague and I was like, oh yeah, now I have a Netflix account. How far?
Yeah.
Let's contribute and pay for the premium. And by that, I was able to cut out.
That was
Then
so we share time too.
For data, from 15K.
Share data.
To 6K. So I was able to save 9K from that.
Wow.
So 9K, if I add that to the fuel money, I know that
it covers all.
Yeah, the fuel. That's one. Another thing is that I now pay attention to how I drive. I've been seeing some advisory on how to get fuel. You don't press brake anyhow. You know why you should wind up your window.
You don't accelerate too fast.
So when I'm going on down my road like this, when I'm running, I'm like, okay,
calm down.
Why not? So I think in everything there's actually some good side to it. It actually prompts some consciousness.
And I think before now, a whole lot of countries have visited. I think Nigeria is one of the countries that has the cheapest petrol, sincerely. The cost per liter is ridiculously lower to almost every country I've visited. Wow. So I think now we are coming to the reality of things. And I don't want to be a prophet of doom. I've been seeing things like this coming earlier. I've been trying to migrate myself to renewable energy. So that when it comes this issue of power, diesel and petrol are out of. Because I used to tell my friend that there's something called nuisance value. Even when you have the money to buy the diesel or the petrol, the availability becomes a problem. And after you struggle to get the money, they are still struggling to get the commodity. You see my hands, they are not built for
soft life.
No, not soft life. I can't be dragging keg. So all those things. It's somehow. So even when it wasn't like soft life, I think my first inverter, I got it like almost 7-8 years ago.
Wow.
I used a dead battery that the wire told me to discard, that can't power a car, it's too bad. And I wanted, let me try this inverter, and that's how my inverter story started. Then I bought on Jumia, I bought for 5K the inverter.
Wow.
You still find it in my car now. I bought for 5K and I bought a charger for like maybe one is 5K, one is 8K, one of the battery. And that was saving me all through the night. So then I had a 40-inch screen. I had about 4 LED lights, one fan, and I think that's all. And charging points, laptops, and the like. And it was working perfectly well for me. And even the realities of what even made me go into that was that I had a generator then. I passed my neighbor. I better pass you. That one. That makes engine oil. So I bought the fuel. I bought the engine oil. I even wanted to give the gen a treat that day because I bought enough oil that day because I needed that gen to have a good night. So I bought, and I was whistling downstairs to go and put on the generator. And some 15 minutes later, I saw myself searching for my generator inside gutter. on that chair. Like, where did that drop them?
Wow.
The owner of the generator.
Wow.
I was checking inside the gutter like,
Oh boy.
maybe.
I can imagine.
And I lived in a building that, yes, it was self-contained apartment, but it was when I faced my face. And there was a drama around somebody. A young lady had filled her generator, wanted to use for the night. A guy, maybe drunk or something, came and fired the guy's gen. That can't be alcohol, really. It can't be alcohol. Fired the lady's gen, but powered his own room. So he removed the plug and put his own plug there.
Wow.
And by the time the lady came back, he and shouting like, why would you? It's not your fuel, I'll buy your fuel back.
Wow.
After you hit up my generator, that's I'm a man of peace, so but I won't take that kind of violence. So that has really started my journey into renewable energy. And I think this is the time when everybody should start looking in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think with new policies around power coming, that states can now generate their own power and the like. So it's better. And most of these things, when you start small, gradually, it's not something you do all big and just go out. You can just get one battery, one small inverter. Most of the critical things you need are just lights so that you don't feel like you are in the dark space.
Yeah. So I think the government is also trying to like move in the direction of using more of gas. So I think I saw I in the news this morning, the oil marketers are like planning to
LPG gas.
Help with buses, but they are electric buses or something like that, or buses that use gas.
Okay, yes, LPG. I think it's LPG.
And also I think they said they were going to bring in some motorcycles that uses
gas as well.
I think it's gas or electrical powered motorcycles to trade for the ones that are using petrol. So they will bring it to people.
Trade and probably have some money.
So I think one. So I think as time goes on, I hope that this whole change will make the price of fuel to go down. I think so.
Okay.
But my challenge is that I'm worried about, because if everybody is moving towards gas, because there's this thing about trend and everybody looking at the market and say, okay,
gas,
this is an alternative.
Okay.
Everybody starts to move. I hope we won't get to that point where
gas becomes like petrol.
Yes, and then fuel.
And that will affect cooking too.
Yeah, and then fuel now becomes,
it's going to be more expensive.
What we'll be looking for again. Because if you look at oil marketers, the way it works is where there is business that will move.
Yeah, true.
In fact, I even heard today that some oil marketers are converting their trucks to gas. I think gas, something like that.
Okay, from petrol to gas.
Yes, so I had something like that. So it means that
containers.
Yeah, and then there will be some specified areas in the country where people can buy
gas.
Yeah, so I think one way or the other, in as much as we are trying to look for alternatives, we should also be careful, because there's still a large chunk of the population using fuel. Using petrol. Yeah. So in the end, so that it's not like we are solving one problem and creating another problem.
Okay. Sorry. So what I see is that according to what Slary said, is fact that I think there will be a very huge market for renewable energy
now,
and in fact, since
the price also go up
exactly. Yeah. So in fact, since that fuel subsidy, I've heard about this fuel subsidy removal since last year. I knew it was going to come up, but I wasn't sure the time it was going to come until the new president-elect mentioned it. Now, I just changed my thoughts from getting a gen now to probably getting an inverter. Yeah. So I already zeroed my mind from getting a gen, anything that concerns gasoline or anything. Okay, I'll prefer buying something that, number one, it will save me from noise. Number two, I won't have to go downstairs, because it's a story building, to go downstairs, then turn to go on gen. And if per adventure, if they want to steal the gen, they will take it before I even get there. So I'll prefer something that I can easily charge and easily turn off, even when I'm also, anytime I come in, I know that this is fully charged. I think for me, it's the best way to go. And it also work for those who, in quote, work from home, and also those who go to work on a daily basis too, and who cannot possibly have the strength to go to go and
stations, go and buy fuel
and buy
after
fuel.
The house also
exactly, boss and all. So I think, for me, I think the way to go for now, if people can actually gather up some money to probably get the renewable energy instead of getting, because in fact, I don't know who I was hearing from. The journey just brought out. See, is he going to sell it now? Abi is going to.
Some people will
and
sell
generators are no more. They are not cheap again.
Yes,
yes,
very expensive now.
I think this is going to lead a lot of people to having to even sell some of their stuff. So, for example, some people will sell their cars, really.
So about the problem,
cars. The fear I have now is that if you look at West Africa, the way West Africa is,
Lord,
Nigeria is like the country that uses best
that's
of cars.
Yes.
So where do you want to sell it to them? Who will buy it?
A car of 25 million.
So what will happen is that there are still people within the system that will be able to afford, that will just buy.
Okay.
And one of the things I think about maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, hybrid cars were around, but were not too common then.
Yeah. So people,
and that was one reason I got it then, because I felt like at some point electric cars are not really sustainable like that much.
Yeah, we don't have the infrastructure
to support it, except you have the investment yourself.
And you can
have
do
your own
it
charging
at
station.
home.
You can charge from home. Just pray that it doesn't go. All of that. So I would just advise, just my own advice. Anybody that has a V6 engine, V8 engine, I don't know where you are flying to. Is it that top 9 and all of that? So all those big engines, this is time to calm down. If you can trade it or sell it and get a small 4-plug engine, and miraculously, those 4-plug engine cars are not cheap.
Yeah, exactly the
small
point.
Corolla of 2007 now, the price is more than
Ancestral. I think I saw.
Even 2005.
I saw Honda Civic 2004, 2003 for 1.1. Yeah.
That's Nigerian used though.
Nigeria used 1.1.
Wow.
So if it's now Tokubo,
it's about 2.5.
Expensive. Yeah. So we have to now put all of that in place, and this now comes to our industry now, service education industry.
Okay.
And now educators need to start, because everything is going up. School fees will want to go up. The parent that you're asking for more school fees, for example, look at our case now. Someone that has spent money to buy food at home, to stock food at home. Transaction has increased. You're not saying that, our school fees were increasing from 500,000, 600,000 to cover for few. That's why you see parents lowering the standard of education.
Yeah.
I cannot come and kill myself.
True.
Carry my child. And take my child to pay 50,000. Just to have big. So schools now have to find a way to strike a balance. And if a school is depending on petrol and maybe diesel and the likes, it's time they start thinking of renewable energy systems.
Yeah.
So that they can have something that a very good solar panel, I keep saying it would last at least 20 years.
Wow.
So 20 years, that's a very long lifespan.
Wow.
A good lithium battery, some of them will come with 5 years warranty. If anything is wrong within the next 5 years, we will replace it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
And I still don't know why people don't see those things. They just assume that, and some people just have the mindset like, renewable energy is just for putting on 2 lights and all of those things.
Yeah.
Our office is powered with renewable energy, over 20 air conditioners and several other things. They're all on it. So it's something that we need to evangelize, let people get to know about it. And another thing, schools and businesses need to start. Another thing, schools and 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 another thing, schools schools and another thing, 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 schools and Mr. Single Man.